answers into the fray. So, moving along. News Beat Bites. In this section, we like to bring attention to some items, like I said, that you might not be hearing about or that you should be paying attention to in the social justice landscape. And I'll go first, gentlemen, if that's okay with you.
Sure, do it up.
If I'm going to share the screen, if I do it, there we go. Google recently entered into a situation where they fired one of the people from the ethical artificial intelligence team, a black woman, because she raised issues with how Google treats its employees of color and women, which you think would be like an ethical thing to do. She works for the ethical artificial intelligence department. They've apologized. They said they're going to do something about it. They're going to do some things. This is from NPR, vowing to restore trust after the ouster. The curious thing about this is that it leads to a bigger question that I think we're going to get into in depth later in time. But so this is why this stuck out to me, is that there's a lot of technology things that are happening, artificial intelligence, facial recognition, where there are racial implications. If you have someone that's involved in the ethical artificial intelligence team and they're ethically looking out for their, for their peoples, and you fire them, they're no longer part of the ethical artificial intelligence team. Well, how ethical is that artificial intelligence going to be? Something we should pay attention to. As the great Silent Knight, who's joining us today, has said about the laws that kind of reinforce the drug war and have led to mass incarceration. He says, if the person who wrote the law is racist, then what you think that law is going to be? And as Ed, you did say that. And as Alex Vitale, I have you here to prove it. And as Alex Vitale said in our last episode that we put out on the Newsbeat feed, basically making the point that you could have a perfectly run, procedurally sound, legal law or guidelines or processes or whatever it is. But if at the heart of that process or that law or that whatever it is sort of racist, then everything grows from that tree is going to be problematic. So I want to look at it later. I think it's interesting to look at and pay attention to now. And I think we should start thinking about what are the implications of technology. We've talked about it in the context of social justice and civil liberties, whether cops can go on your cell phone or not. Again, if the disproportionately arresting black and brown people, then they're going to be the ones that are potentially going to be disproportionately having their privacy violated. So all of these things tie in. I thought Google little snafu was part of that overarching issue. I wanted to bring it up for today.
Major snafu, right?
News Beat Bite. All right, gentlemen, passing the torch.
Yeah, so yesterday was International Human Rights Day, as designated by the United Nations, and a number of different groups did some incredible reports highlighting atrocities across the globe that need more attention. Human Rights Watch did a great piece identifying about a dozen stories. I just wanted to bring some attention to Human Rights Watch as sort of the watchdog, global watchdog for some of these things. Manny, speaking of artificial intelligence, one of the things on this list is there was a campaign they're trying to bring attention to go stop killer robots in terms of robots. Yeah. So I mean, this is just one of the things on the list, but apparently there's massive development of weapon systems that basically select and attack and eradicate targets without any type of human intervention at all, any human in the process.
Right.
So that's just one of the campaigns that Human Rights Watch flagged. And then I want to bring attention to a report that was published yesterday by the International Federation of Journalists, just again, annually bringing attention to the risks that journalists around the globe face, simply reporting the truth and informing the public. There were 42 journalists killed so far in 2020, 13 of those in Mexico. Mexico has topped their list for the past 3 or 4 years. And, I just ask everybody, check that out at ifj.org. And it's just important to know these things that are going on across the globe. I think that a lot of times we get stuck in our bubble and really don't veer much too out of it. So,
yeah. All right. It's again something you might not hear about. For those who know that we're a podcast, so we're doing this thing to kind of as an extension. We come across a lot of these issues and topics and news. We want to bring them to you, so you know about them. You know that there's actually there's organizations that just protect journalists' lives. That all this banter that you've heard over the last few years about fake news and enemy of the people is dangerous for journalists. There are journalists that have lost their lives, literally, or in great danger. So this points to that. We've done a couple of episodes about that. Just if you want to go through our repertoire, you can find Newsbeat podcasts wherever you listen to podcasts, including usnewsbeat.com. We do have a couple of episodes that focus on some of these issues, including enemy of the American people, the U.S. government's war on journalism and press freedom. So all of these things do tie into, tie together. So it is very important to understand that when you hear this fake news thing and it's like kind of thrown around as a joke, that it is way more serious than that. Thank you for that, Chris. Rachetti.
Yeah. So speaking of tying in, on Human Rights Day of all days, the U.S. government yesterday executed Brandon Bernard. So a lot of people may have heard about this because it became big over the last week. There was a lot of celebrities and activists trying to get President Donald Trump to stop the execution of Brandon Bernard. And it's sort of there's so many stories here within a story. Bernard was 18 when he was sentenced, and he was basically an accomplice to the murder of 2 people, Todd and Stacey Bagley. And he wasn't the guy who killed them, who fired the shots, but again, he was the accomplice. And in recent days, 5 out of the 9 surviving jurors have come out and called for clemency in terms of stopping the execution, but giving Bernard a life sentence. Even his lawyers weren't arguing for freedom. They were just saying, stop the execution and let him live out the rest of his life in prison.
Right. Which previously could have. Federally, we weren't putting people to death, as it were.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, this was up until July, the federal government hadn't executed anybody since 2003. So it's been a big push for the Trump administration. I was going to mention that along with the 5 of the 9 surviving jurors, a former federal prosecutor who was involved in the appeals case for Bernard also said that she didn't think that he should be executed. And there's so much to this case that I hope people go read about it, because when you start peeling back the layers, you see that a lot of people were at fault, especially his trial attorneys, who didn't do an adequate enough job to keep him off of death row. And that's what his lawyers now are arguing, that if he had adequate representation, and if that same case was tried today in front of these very same jurors, Brandon Bernard would get a life sentence. He wouldn't get a death sentence. Just even if you talk about even if you had competent lawyers. So, and just for the big picture, Bernard is the 9th person that's been executed by the federal government since July. As I mentioned, the first is 2003, and I think there's 4 more people who are set to be executed before Inauguration Day, which is also significant because Joe Biden, as we mentioned last week, opposes the death penalty.
Right. So let me, as a layman, they're fast tracking some of these executions to get him in before this guy got to go.
That's what it seems.
There's something, you could fast track judicial nominees. That's one thing that, people, administrations do before they leave office, but to fast track executions is basically unheard of. I think I could be wrong, but I saw a stat that it's been over a century since somebody has been executed by the federal government during a lame duck presidency, and that's what we have right now. Wow. Even though Trump and his 106 Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives think the election should be overturned.
All right, there you have it. Some important information for your brain, something that you don't hear enough about. You might have heard about, the execution of Brandon Bernard because some celebrities got involved at the last minute or tried to get involved or whatever the case may be. It's always like the last minute thing that, you hear about and then it fizzles out. Way more needed to be known about this case and other cases like it, as we know. All right, guys, thank you for that. Those were our news beat bites for today.